Hello and welcome to episode number 8 of our podcast. My name is Elliot Greenman.
I'm Alexis Enel.
And this episode is about, it's the introduction to the first part of our course on how to understand chronic or persistent pain.
Yes.
We go through some of the basics that are covered in the course.
A bit the plan of the course as well, with the different parts in the course. It's pretty succinct way. It's like a glossary a little bit, like a
almost like an index.
That's it.
Yeah. And a lot of things we've covered before, but this is, as you say, much more succinct, and it's all kind of in one place.
In one place, that's it.
So yeah,
we hope you enjoy.
Yeah.
And then do not hesitate to comment and follow us on our Instagram, especially.
Perambulations in franglais.
So let's start, and we're going to talk about pain and the course that we've been working on a little bit together.
Superb.
But I think it would be a good idea to start from the start.
Yeah.
And maybe introduce yourself to me.
Yeah.
And then kind of say why you decided to start maybe learning a little bit more and
about pain and saying so my name is Alexis Enel. I'm an osteopath, and I've been very interested in those patients who came to me who had recurrent ailments for no apparent reason. And that was, I think, starting to be a bit of a bugbear a little bit. And I've really looked into an awful lot of the literature and on the musculoskeletal rehabilitation, on visceral osteopathy, and a lot of neurophysiology as well. And I was quite interested in understanding a bit more how to be able to work better with people who had pains that seemed to be persisting a lot, basically. And I've done I was interested as well with an approach of counseling and psychotherapy called the Human Givens. And I've gone to several courses, and they tend to, one of those was about pain as well, and about a biopsychosocial model of pain, which was quite a bit of an eye-opening type thing, because as an osteopath, you're really treating, we treat the body as a unit, as one of the principles, but actually you end up treating just bodies, really, in a way. And a lot of my colleagues, or some of my colleagues at least, tend to, and a lot of the musculoskeletal professions, rehabilitation professions, tend to be a bit obsessed by the tissue causing pain, and it completely kind of takes you away from people in a way, and you look at really anatomical thing, pathological processes and things which actually doesn't really help you to treat people in a way. So Human Givens, I did a lot about, I've been very interested since graduating as an osteopath like 17 years ago about the fascia, and that part of the connective tissue, which was, so I've done quite a few courses on myofascial release, and I got introduced to the anatomy train with Mr. Meyer, which is actually quite an interesting functional model of thing, and then not taking one muscle in isolation, but looking at the way it's used for movement, basically. So that was another thing as well. And and visceral osteopathy as well, all those organs, and the fact that it's really integral part of my way of looking at things, even from a mechanical point of view, in a human body, basically. But there's obviously other things, and all of a sudden, with that biopsychosocial model of pain, the whole thing fell into place, and basically the pain gate model of pain, which was like from the 1960s, I think, mid 60s. Can't remember exactly who the neurologist who actually coined it, but they were looking at the reason how different people were experiencing a different amount of pain with a similar stimulus, basically. So when people were walking on hot coals, it's pretty much as hot for everybody, but some people were not experiencing as much pain as others. At all. And so they were wanting to understand how come maybe the brain was actually influencing the way pain was perceived, really, okay? And they looked at all different neurons, all the different synapses, and the different effectors, all those kind of stuff, and they came up with a bit of a framework which is very embryological. So there's 3 different layers, and that's we've based the course on that framework, basically, okay? So yeah, so that's really how it really kind of evolved, and to try to work better with people who were quite interested in knowing a bit more what was happening to them, and having a bit more tools, and maybe increasing a bit how many strings to their bow they had to actually manage their pain, basically. And I think that's quite an important thing that we hope to, as musculoskeletal specialists, bring to people, basically. People need to be made a bit more responsible, and their competence need to be kind of directed in the right direction for them to be able to mitigate their pain without using too much medication, basically, and wasting too much time and the rest, really.
So is the course mainly for musculoskeletal specialists? Or
No, especially actually it's really, well, we could do a bit more another course and go and delve a bit more in depth with all those different modules and things like that, which actually we could, but it's really for the layman. I think we've tried to really word it in a way that can be understood by most people. And it's not because you might have a sciatica, you might have headaches, you might have IBS, you might have asthma. It all applies quite nicely to all those different elements, basically. So yes, we look at knee pain, we can look at shoulder pain, we can look at neck pain, all those kind of stuff, but there's quite much more that can be applied because it's about pain, basically, and pain is really what is very important to redefine a little bit, really, and the way we tend to approach it is really depending on how we define it, really. That's the thing, really. So yeah, a lot of people will benefit from that, not only musculoskeletal specialists, but it's quite a good introduction to other osteopaths and chiropractors, maybe physios as well, because it's quite a general thing. It's no, I've not invented anything, we've not coined a new thing. It's already something that is already there, and we introduce it in a quite sequential fashion to make it super digestible and super really easy to understand, really.
It's like so obviously I've been filming you with this course and so obviously learning about it along the way, and you mentioned the Human Givens and Joe Griffin and Ivan Tyrell who did the Human Givens, and those little books that we have called Organising Ideas. I really like that as a term, but I also like it because it's like that's kind of what this course is doing. It's essentially, it's nothing new, and we haven't come up with any new thing. But it's just organising some ideas and some really strong scientific, psychological, philosophical ideas and theories that seem to work really well together when it comes to pain.
And it helps us to redefine it and to maybe make it less a bit of a dead end. And if we add a little bit of meaning to the whole thing, we can maybe have an open-ended type discussion about pain, rather than to completely like, well, you're in pain, take the painkillers, and then that's it, really.
Or I think it was like a housemate or a friend I was talking to recently, or like, because it's really hard to explain persistent pain or chronic pain, right? And it's like take the painkiller, maybe do something for like a couple of weeks, then it doesn't go away, so you come back and then you have an x-ray, then you have this, and then you have another thing, and no one can find anything really other than maybe a very, very small something. no one can really find any reason for the pain.
That's it.
It's like, yeah, it's quite interesting. So what that now that we've kind of talked a little bit about persistent and chronic pain,
Yeah. And acute pain.
yeah. So acute
I think that's-
and chronic.
Yes, I think that's the way to redefine it really, because a lot of people are going to be like, oh, I've got neuropathic pain. Oh, I've got all sorts of pain, like loads of different type of pain. When actually, pain is just pain, and the tissue causing pain is your brain, mostly.
And that's the same whether it's
No-
acute or chronic pain.
No brain, no pain. That's it. It's pretty much like that. Okay? No brain, no pain. And no, I think the acute and the persistent part of the divide between the two is just about the tissue damage. I think that's one thing. We really associate pain with tissue damage. So you sprain your ankle or you break your arm. Like if I say, oh, be careful, you're going to break your arm, and then if you do so, well, maybe you withdraw a bit from the activity because you know if you break your arm, it's going to be pretty painful. Okay, that's the whole thing, really. Okay, but so in everybody's mind, pain is about tissue damage, when actually there's a lot of pain out there that has got no tissue damage.
And that would fit into chronic pain.
Into persistent pain.
Persistent
Yeah,
pain,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Why do you call it persistent? And not
Chronic is again another word that tells us that it's never going to end. It's chronic. It's going to be like everlasting. Persistent. It's maybe finite in time. Yes, it lasts for a while, but it stops.
It's like-
Chronic is going to be like forever.
yeah,
Basically.
chronic almost sets the story up to be really like a really big horrible thing,
Long-standing
thing
forever.
that's going to be really intense and it's going to be there forever.
That's it.
Whereas
So you prime yourself.
whereas
a bit.
persistent is just like
Yeah,
it's persistent.
It's-
It's there and it's annoying and it's
but it will end.
yeah,
It will end.
or it can end.
Or it can end. Exactly.
I know you said at the start, and like obviously we've been talking about this for a long time, so I know I've got a pretty good gist of what you're talking about. But I guess one of the fascinating things for me is like why did you start, and when did you start looking into things like the for no apparent reason and the chronic pain and people coming back to you like every other month or something, and then like when so you became qualified from the osteopath school in Kent.
The European school,
And that was 17 years ago.
Yeah.
And you've been practicing ever since.
Yeah.
At what point did you notice I'm not like why am I not able to completely heal this person's bad lower back?
Because to start with, as a therapist, you want to help people, or you pretend you want to help people, and maybe it's not really very clear that you actually maybe want to help yourself, and rather than help others, but you can help yourself using others, and you really want to make people better.
Yeah.
And after a while you start to come across certain people where the way of thinking as a therapist doesn't really work. So you have to actually assess that a little bit. And bizarrely, it's when I started to treat animal. And treating animal and seeing that the discomfort the animal is experiencing, once you've addressed the musculoskeletal chain, muscular, myofascial, not really especially visceral, but you take into account two of the peripheral modulation, the pain goes straight away.
So just to clarify that bit a little bit more, is like the peripheral modulation is like peripherally.
So it's like central is like your brain, peripheral is the rest.
Yeah,
that's it.
And so the layers, the peripherals set up into 3 layers: skin, and then muscle, joint, and stuff, and then gut, right?
Organ. Yeah.
And so when you address the skin and the muscle and the joint, the pain goes.
Yeah. So, like looking at an anatomy train type thing, because there are anatomy trains with horses as well. There are functional pattern of movement, all those kind of stuff, and you restore a symmetry between the right and the left and the front and the back. All of a sudden, the whole thing goes. So why is it you can't do that with humans? And the main thing is the central modulation, because we got a brain that actually is very complicated. I think the brain of the horse is as complex as a human in a way, okay? With a different part, with a different reptilian brain, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the pineal gland, the geniculate, whatever, okay? I know the cortices, all the rest, okay? But when it comes to humans, it's the way we use it, again, which is very complicated. And our central modulation is what actually hinders quite a lot of our or enhances our perception of pain or diminishes it. And that's what the pain gate was actually investigating, basically, okay? So, yeah, and that's what really treating animals really made me realize that it's actually, let's not despair. I was thinking humans were a bit flawed and it was too difficult to get rid of their pain completely. But actually, it's just a question of maybe me not having been experienced enough to find the proper framework to actually present to the patient for him to actually use to help himself. Okay, rather than me trying to do the whole thing in order to make them better. And I think that's where the whole thing started to reframe itself and stumbling upon one thing and another, and started possibly quite peripherally. I ended up having to investigate a bit what was happening centrally in terms of with hypnosis, with neuro-linguistic programming, with all sorts of different ways. And then I stumbled upon the human givens and their biopsychosocial model of pain. And I think it's absolutely mind-boggling type thing, and it's very, very relevant, basically. And a lot of what people suffer from when they are under a persistent pain pattern or persistent pain under the spell of a persistent pain, there's a lot of inflammation. So that's the whole thing. There's an itis in the background, really. So it's Achilles tendinitis. It's myositis. It's anything itis. Okay, there's a little bit of that in the background, and actually the expectation fulfillment theory of dreams that Joe Griffin, he's a genius. To have, it's like Einstein and looking at E = mc square. It's almost a bit like, it's almost too neat, it's almost too simple. But when and it's articulated in such a neat and beautiful fashion that it's actually really exactly describing reality. And it's quite because you talk about Freud, we talk a lot about Jung, we talk about Lacan, we talk about all those psychotherapists and the way they've looked at the subconscious and all those kind of stuff and thing, and they've been contributing to quite a lot to the whole thing, but it scattered the whole profession completely, really. And again, I think psychotherapists treat the brain, or they think, or they try to treat people. But I'm pretty sure people who've got anxiety, they don't treat anxiety. They treat people who've got anxiety, and people who've got anxiety, they've got physical manifestations of it, really. And I'm supposedly treating physical thing, but people who've got IBS, well, maybe it's one part of that anxiogenic and that flight and fright aspect of it, and that's related to the expectation fulfillment theory of dream, and it's to do with sleep, all those, and all of a sudden it completely fell into place. It was like bang, that's it. I think that's possibly So the myofascial things, the animals, treating animals, looking at different technique, visceral, and having a few patients that have taught me that there's a bit more to be learned again, really, and investigating things. And then you come across Joe Griffin. I went to a couple of the Human Givens training days. Well, I did most of the training days to do the Human Given diploma. I've done it in Bristol and a bit in London. Yeah, it's exactly that, really. It fits so well, like people who are in pain don't sleep very well. Oh, that's quite strange.
Yeah.
How come?
No one in pain would deny that.
That's it. I sleep like a baby when I'm in pain.
Yeah.
It's excruciating, but I sleep really well.
Yeah.
No, you don't. People don't sleep very well. They don't sleep very well. How come? They dream quite a lot. Oh, yes, dream a lot. Oh, how come you dream a lot? All those red and things. Because it's not a physical... Pain is not a physical manifestation. And pain is not a brain or a mental manifestation. It's a bit of both. It's a mind-body or body-mind. I'm not sure. I mean, we hope to... Maybe I think if we were to do anything really productive about all that, would to coin a word that would be quite easy for everybody to know what it's on about, which talks about mind and body in a way.
I've seen it written in a few places, like mind, no space plus body.
Yeah.
And I quite like that in a way, because they are. We've treated them as separate things, and therefore it's easy for people to visually see them as separate things.
Yeah.
And then understand what they're on about. But when you put them together with a plus with no space, and it almost becomes one thing, almost like an equation kind of thing. But it still has that separate thing, and people like you're right. Like people do, we need to kind of remove people's separation of the two things.
Of course.
Even some people are like, including myself, it's like, oh, it looks like our body being in pain is communicating to our mind, or that, oh, maybe there's something that needs addressing, maybe physically, maybe centrally, maybe peripherally, maybe centrally.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, that probably also works the other way around as well. In fact, that is the other way around. In fact, it isn't one communicating to the other, it's just a whole body.
That's it. So
it's a whole thing.
Even writing in mind plus body is a bit biased almost.
It's not right.
It's not quite right, because it's body plus mind as well. But by saying that, it's not right either. So it's a bit weird. So it's treating humans. And I think the word is I'm very annoyed having to even use the word, but it's quite holistic. So it's all-encompassing a little bit, and I think that's what the magic of it is. And your body is telling you something and is asking you to pay attention to it. And bizarrely, your brain at the same time is trying to figure out how to deal with the whole lot. And maybe it's because he's trying to figure out how to deal with a lot and he cannot, that is actually highlighting you that there's something not quite right in your body, and vice versa. And somebody who's got anxiety, is it really in their mind or is it in their body? Do they feel it, palpitation? Have they got like a bit of a gut thing? All those kind of stuff, really. And that ARPET model as well is completely bonkers. The activating agent, the pattern matching, the emotion or sensation, and the thought, really. And that's, that's like super neat, really. The way the whole sequence of events is happening, really. That's it, really. So all that philosophical way that we are imbibed in, with that Cartesian way of looking, and the mind and the body are two different things, is lunacy, basically.
We have to close that window.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of noisitis in the background.
Noisitis, yeah. No, it's really... pain is a very special experience, and there's maybe a few people who would argue that you're not alive without being in pain, And when you're in pain, there's nothing. You're never more alive than when you're in pain. And there's a bit of something about consciousness and being alive that being in pain is a prerequisite part of being alive in a way. So I think it's something quite fundamental we all share as well, and that's quite an interesting thing. And having to contend with pain is a very, very peculiar thing. So we want people to be able to debunk the whole thing and be able to step back. The other completely amazing term that has been coined by with the Human Givens and Joe Griffin and Ivan Tyrrell is called catextia, and that context blindness.
So that means catextia means
context blindness. We live in a very humanistically driven world, and by that there's a couple of axioms about it. What feels right must be right, what feels wrong must be wrong, and so it's about an experiential thing, okay? And the fact of being able to use reason or your brain and reasoning in order to be able to make to have a proper decision making, a decision making that is going to enhance your experience basically, and it has to be rational, and that's where the catextia makes you realize that humanistic framework is a complete lot of bollocks. The thing really, because there is no way you can make an awful lot of decision in a very rational fashion. And if you fall in love with somebody, it's definitely not a rational experience you're having. You're completely blinded by the whole lot, and you're possibly, but nonetheless. Anyway, it's quite an interesting concept about the whole thing.
I think that's a good way to kind of talk about catextual context blindness, because it's like you're so aroused in, like first few dates and doing this with that person and having that connection and blah blah blah. Whereas, and I think most people would agree that it's completely irrational. Like, why is it that there's this one person in particular at that time that you've met? And so I think it's a really good way to explain context blindness. But how does context blindness, what does that have to do with pain, and what does that have to do with the?
But I said. So when you're in pain, you're relatively aroused, and then when you're aroused, you're more likely to be in pain. So
as in sexually aroused, or
no. Well, yeah, maybe not sexually aroused, but stressed.
Mm-hmm.
Your state of arousal. Yes, sexual arousal is one aspect of it, no doubt, and I don't think it helps you think too much when you're sexually aroused. Mm-hmm. But I think for arousal as a global term, not to talk about stress. Type thing, because after we need to redefine stress. There's a bit like maybe a bacteriological stress, a hormonal stress, you've got mechanical stress, you've got digestive stress, you've got emotional stress, you have radiative stress. If you're on the moon in your thing and there's a solar explosion, like a coronal mass ejection, I can tell you the radiation you're going to take is going to stress you big time to your DNA, really. So you're going to have you need to have your good dose of antioxidant to try to repair yourself, kind of, okay? So arousal is a state of mind type thing. Mm-hmm. So it's more of an emotional type stress, basically. Mm-hmm. And that prevents you from the more aroused or the more emotionally stressed, the more you're going to experience pain. And the more pain you're going to experience, the more emotionally aroused you're going to be. Okay? So there is a definite correlation between that arousal level and pain. No doubt. And that arousal level needs to be able to, is correlated with expectation. Is correlated with inflammation. Is correlated possibly to tissue damage as well. type thing. So you need to really be able to having a therapist, having a quick look at a glance at the case history and the onset of things. If you've sprained your ankle 2 days ago and you come to me, I'm not going to talk to you about the pain gate at all. We're going to just like look at the inflammation, look at that peace and love rather than the rice type thing, in order to compress the area, maybe avoid a few anti-inflammatories, elevate it, and look at how is it we're going to be able to maybe look on Amazon to get a wobble board, because as soon as you're going to be able to put back load on the whole lot, you're going to be able to kind of do proprioceptive exercises and things like that. So you need to teach yourself whilst you're inactive in order to be able to rehabilitate yourself, and that's helping you to be quite optimistic. Anyway.
And that's like more, that's acute pain, right?
That's acute pain. Yes, that's it. And there's a lot to do with acute pain, okay? But it's usually a self-limiting thing. After 6 weeks-ish, or you sprain your ankle. Well, how many of us have sprained our ankle, and then he has got better after maybe even 3 weeks, really. It can go really quite fast. If you've really you've had an avulsion fracture or whatever, it can take a bit longer and things like that. But let's say after 6 weeks, the tissue is healed, you've restored function into the joint and the area, and there's less swelling, there's less pain, or not at all, and then you forget that you've actually sprained your ankle, okay? And that's it. But that's acute pain. But the main thing is, in some cases, bizarrely, the expectation you had of what you should have been able to do had your ankle not be painful is stressing you no end. And therefore you're going to start, because you don't have a plan of action in order to remain quite optimistic about the outcome of that injury, you start to be aroused. And you start to be like, oh no, I need to stop, I can't go to work today, or I can't go and play tennis, or I can't do my competition, or whatever. You start to withdraw yourself from activity, and your circle of friends, or your means to actually get income, or quite a lot of things. And then that start to prevent the whole the normal physiological process of healing to actually complete itself, basically. And then you 6 months down the line, your ankle is still a little bit swollen, is still painful, you still hop on it, you still can't really play sports on it, or maybe you can't really go to work or something like that, really, okay, because it's your low back and it's completely buggered, and you were like a plasterer, or you were doing like painting ceilings, and then your back is too painful, you can't even stand, basically. So all those kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden you're so stressed by not having had any income, because it's not really your back the problem. It's what you can do with your back, because you're human, and you are trying to mitigate the uncertainty of the future day in, day out, basically.
And you're not able to do that because
your back is painful, and therefore you're starting to freak out because you don't know how to go about, because you're not a good musculoskeletal rehabilitation specialist yourself, so you lack competence about the whole lot, and the pain reminds you that it's actually damaged as well. So and everybody's telling you, oh, you got wear and tear in your back. Oh my God, you slipped your disc. Well, I'd like to see a bit how it goes. How to slip a disc. Yeah, maybe you can slip your pants, but I don't think you can slip your disc. But that's another story. Okay, so a lot of the everyday language we talk about is about dramatizing the whole lot and actually making correlations between one thing and another. So you've really hurt your back pretty badly from doing some lifting, which was not really that much lifting, but nonetheless, you were lifting the loo rolls from the boot of the car, and your back goes into spasm, and the spasm is so intense, and the pain is so intense, you really think you damage your back in your head, okay? And you're crippled, and 6 weeks down the line, you're still in bed, you still haven't gone to work, you're starting to get pretty wind up about the whole lot. You finally get an appointment with the doctor who sends you to have an X-ray or MRI scan because you're in a lot of pain. He's pumped you full of codeine, naproxen, and diazepam to help a bit the stuff because it's so painful, and we need to reduce the whole inflammation and the muscle spasm and the pain. So the pain, the cocodamol, the spasm, the diazepam, and the inflammation, the naproxen or whatever. Okay. Oh, and we give you a bit of omeprazole for your stomach lining, so we don't fuck your stomach up with non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Anyway, and you go to have your scan, and what happens? There's a bulge in your disc. Oh, the disc is bulged. No wonder. So we're going to need to do surgery to remove that bulge, basically, which the surgeon is going to do an absolutely fantastic job, because nowadays it's like keyhole. There's no scarring or virtually no scarring. He goes in, it's minimal effect. He takes the bulge out. He does macro discectomy or slight decompression, all those kind of stuff, and then you're still in pain. And there's a lot of people where, and it's no joke to them, because they are still in pain. They were, the model of thinking is so warped, because they are talking not about acute pain, they are talking about persistent pain, and they are thinking that the tissue is actually damaged, and therefore it's causing the pain.
And therefore, when it's fixed,
when it's removed, the pain should be gone. And no. A lot of people, the pain is actually not gone in a lot of people.
I've had this exact conversation with a lot of my friends who have had surgeries, ankle, knee, and it's mainly those two, to be honest, ankle and knee. I've had a handful of friends that have it. And obviously, when they're told by the surgeon that they're probably going to be in pain for the rest of their life with it,
after having had the surgery,
and
they were sold that it was going to fix the problem.
Well, no, initially, nearly all of them, I think actually all of them, thought it was going to solve the problem and then went away. And then, 2 months later, the pain...
No, because the surgeon said, I'm going to fix your meniscus or trim a bit the cartilage, your subtalar joint in your ankle, and then we'll see a little bit with the discomfort whether it's going to change something or not. I think the expectation is pretty different than, we'll fix the problem because we're going to do surgery on it, really, in a way, really. I think there's a lot of, we set people...
So they set the story up to be like, this is going to be the panacea. That's
it. So we remove the tissue causing pain, and then the pain goes. Because we've removed the tissue causing pain. It's that really, really simple way of thinking. In a way, that's that black and white way of thinking, really.
And it's the same thing with read some articles about knees and backs over the last year, and there's been lots of studies on like runners with knees, and they might have a little bit of like something or whatever, but they have no pain. And then people who don't run, their knees are like, some of them are fine, some of them aren't fine, but regardless of whether they're fine or not, they have pain. And then the same with back, where they did they tested they had half a group of people who were in pain, half weren't in pain, and a higher percentage of the people who weren't in pain had a reason to be in pain, as in medically, structurally. So it's like, all of a sudden our knowledge of our structure, and it's like you said before, I've probably got like the beginnings of arthritis here or whatever, and I don't have pain. It's like our idea of pain, which is a really strange concept in itself, because it is weird. It's not even.
We think it's something to protect us. In a way, really. It's because we've damaged us ourselves, really.
And it's not like anything else. There's nothing else.
There's no correlation between the amount of wear and the amount of pain. If you don't have radicular symptoms, I mean, if you don't have pain down your leg, and you don't have a diminished strength into one of your muscle in your leg or in your foot, okay, the likelihood of what's happening is there's some inflammation in your low back, and we can completely ignore the extent of the wear and tear. Because some people who's got much more wear and tear than you is gonna have no pain. But he doesn't have any inflammation. Okay? So the use he has of his back and the expectation he has of what he can do and can achieve with the level of wear he's got in his back is actually met, basically. So he doesn't, so
he doesn't experience pain.
So he doesn't experience pain. It becomes quite an interesting concept, really.
And this is what's discussed all.
In that course, the course is really only trying to. I think we discuss it here a bit more not in depth, but it needs to be put together. So there's that second part of the course where we're going to do different body parts and start to apply. I think it's a bit of a theoretical. We need to put on the ground a little bit our theoretical framework.
And that's the first
and that's
part.
the first part. The course we just finished is to do with that, really. And I think the discussion we're having now here is going to be really about applying it to different body parts, and we'll demonstrate different techniques and a way to integrate the whole lot and a way to actually reframe a little bit what's happening, because your shoulder is one thing, but and a shoulder pain, because that's the thing, really. You experience pain from your shoulder now, and it's the experience of the pain now, okay? But your brain is having a bit another aggro from what is it you're gonna be able to do if your shoulder is actually painful tomorrow, and you have to think about it now.
So you're becoming more aroused, more focused.
From that, really,
more almost like practicing. You're like getting better at being in pain. Like
that's it.
Now,
the
shoulder, or like, I have issues at the tops of my back, left and right, as you know. And when I'm in pain with that, then I'm thinking about being sat on my exercise ball in front of a computer for 8 hours tomorrow. It's all of a sudden, like,
oh my god, you might actually.
It's like I'm practicing to be in pain for the rest of the evening and for it to worsen.
That's it. And then it's a bit almost fulfilling the whole lot, really, okay? And so you're actually trying to mitigate the uncertainty of the future that the pain brings you. And therefore, it's not so much your shoulder, but it's the work. So it's not maybe your shoulder that you're actually dreading, but more being sat at the desk doing some computer work. Or is it maybe what is it you do actually with your computer sat? Not the fact of being sat in front of your computer.
The actual.
Anyway, that's another.
Again, this is stuff that's spoken about in the course. So I'm kind of bringing it back to the course, because obviously the idea of this podcast is to try and get some us talking about it.
We diverge all the time.
Of course,
there's quite a lot.
And that's exactly why we do a podcast.
And answering why is always quite an interesting thing.
So I want to talk about the what. So there's the idea is that we do two parts to the course, right? We do the first part, which is kind of like, the theory and outlining the pain gate and how we're going to approach our approach.
The philosophical framework, a little bit. So it's not a Cartesian way of doing, definitely. And it's a bit that mind-body framework, a little bit. And a bit of, we try to go further than that humanistic way of looking at things a bit as well. Because pain requires all that to be able to be tackled properly. So that's the theoretical part on that first module, I think. And then after we look at the pain gate itself and the framework, and the pain gate is divided into two parts, which is the peripheral modulation of the pain and a central modulation of the pain. And the peripheral modulation is divided into three different layers, embryological layers. We got the ectoderm, which makes the skin and the central nervous system and the nervous system. We get the mesoderm, who does the muscle, the connective tissue, and the joint, a bone. And we get the endoderm, who makes all the organs. It's a bit more complicated than that, because part of your heart has got a bit of endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm, whatever.
It's not quite as black and
It's
white.
not quite
so
black and white, but we are not here to do embryology. We are here to do pain gate, okay? And we need to here to divide the whole lot. So the skin, muscle and the joint and the gut, okay? So we're gonna discuss a little bit the different techniques, a little bit theoretically, that can be helping for those with those three different layers in order to be able to dampen the perception of pain, okay? And then on the last module, we talk to a great extent about the central modulation, because that's a big part of it, really, and how come we actually prime ourselves to be in more pain or not, basically, okay? So the philosophical framework helps a little bit to redefine things. And then there's several neurotransmitter as well that we talk about, and dopamine, the serotonin and the endorphins are the three key neurotransmitter in your brain that are really the layman should really know about, because there's so much out there that actually mimics those kind of things, basically. And dopamine would be all the stimulant, like cocaine especially, and maybe amphetamines and things like that. It's a dopaminergic system. It's going to enhance your motivation type thing. So that's really, well, there's quite a lot of cocaine use and amphetamine use in the world. I think there's something like 150,000 tons of cocaine produced or something like that. It's completely something
mental. It feels good to be motivated.
It feels good to be motivated, and therefore that's why it's quite something that people quite like to do. The serotonin, well, there's all the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, all the antidepressants they are nowadays for any kind of little blue moment we can have that thing, and we pop a pill to actually enhance our serotonin level. And then there's the opiates, which tends to be with endorphins, which actually deal with your reward. So you have an expectation and you want to try to fulfill it in the world. You need to be motivated, and you need to be intentional. You need to have some intention. So you need to activate your body in the world to actually be able to fulfill that need, okay? And that requires dopamine, okay? And the potential of doing that without losing too many feathers is maybe quite limited. So we've got a mechanism that actually is going to dampen pain a little bit, which is endorphins. Because at the end of the day, after having done some gardening, well, you might be having created a little tears in your back or in your shoulder or in your muscle, in your biceps, because you were pulling weeds, all those kind of stuff. And the endorphin is going to dampen your perception of how much you perceive pain, as well as tapping you on the shoulder to say, oh, well done, you've actually acted upon your expectation in the world, and you've activated yourself with your body, and you've actually achieved something, because now your garden is really nice, and therefore well done. And that's the endorphin doing that. And if you've done a bit of that, it gives you a little bit of serotonin. That's putting you a bit in that dominance hierarchy a little bit. So you know your place in society, or you know your place in the world a little bit, really. Maybe gardening is not maybe the best example for that, but it's one part of it, really.
I think it's one of the best examples for it, because it's, lots of, especially like,
you can cultivate your garden, and then you can put a wall around the garden.
Yeah, and there's lots to do, and you do it in your own way. And also, and I don't want to like stigmatize or put people in boxes or whatever, but generally older people do gardening. And generally older people seem to be like, I mean, the mental health issue is not within the older generations of people. And so
less so, because there's quite a lot of loneliness in.
Sure, but like the like depression and SSRIs and stuff. It's like, most of it's like 40s and under. And it's like, with people doing something that's manageable in their back garden, and then getting the reward from it. I think so. And it's like having that intent. What's the word you used a minute ago? Like activating.
You need to be intentional.
I think that's unbelievably interesting. And for some people who are depressed, or lots of people, or anyone who's depressed, it's like it's the hardest thing to act intentional and do something,
That's it.
it's the number one thing that's going to help you figure things out. And even if it's something that that doesn't give you meaning because it's not working, and you want to be an F1 engineer or something, but the only job you can get is working at the bar
or car mechanic
or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, but it's still going to give you. You're still going to find some meaning within it. And if it's a stepping stone, then just acting with intent and getting some momentum and going and stuff, it's going to really help you get out of that negative state.
It gives you a bit more control. It gives you some competence. It gives you a sense of status. It gives you some financial security. It gives you a meaningful relationship with others, because you're going to talk about engines and carburetors and stuff like that, and you can't really talk about that with your wife. At the end of the day, those kind of stuff, really. So yeah, I think any kind of thing, but you need to have a bit of intention when you actually set to do it, really. And I think the great part of it, and we like Jordan Peterson for that forever, basically, is dragons. Basically, we need to slay dragons, and it's a very interesting thing of being in the UK and in England, especially here, because the patron saint of England is St. George, really. And when I ask my patient who is the patron saint of England, oh, St. George, oh, what does he do? Oh, he sits on his horse. Yeah, no, as well. Yeah. He sits on his horse, but what does he do? Oh, he slays the dragon, he kills the dragon. Okay, great. What does the dragon hoard? What does the dragon keep? Gold. Okay, great. The dragon hoard gold, basically. Yeah. So if you kill the dragon, you get the treasure. Right, exactly. So you motivate yourself, you get a goal, killing the dragon, and you put some intention into it. The dragon might breathe fire, and you might lose a couple of feathers.
But we've got endorphins. So
we've got endorphins, that's okay. And once you've done the whole lot, you got the treasure. And the treasure is maybe knowing where you are in that position in society, and having a bit of serotonin, really. And I talk about pain as well, being a dragon as well.
Of course.
And the main reward you have from actually managing your pain is to regain the headspace that pain takes away from you. So the we smash your big toe now, and how much are you going to be able to concentrate on the podcast? It's going to be quite difficult. Because the pain is going to be taking so much of your headspace. It's going to be quite difficult. And then after a while, you're going to start to think, am I going to go back home? Because I might not be able to drive, in a way, really. So then now you're thinking about, in an hour's time, when your big toe is going to have swelled, and you're not going to be able to fit even in your shoe, and you're not going to be able to drive, all those kind of stuff. So imagine the headspace you start to take, and then you start to realize, yeah, Alexis, the bastard, he doesn't have a bad big toe, and he can really drive back home. And it looks like everybody outside can do it, really. Okay?
Psychotic about it, and think about how easy your work. Yeah,
that's it. Because there's that as well. You have to contend.
Just rehearsing being in more pain, or
in more pain, and things like that. So being able to really dampen and shrink the headspace pain takes away from you is really the best dragon you can have slayed, because the treasure is limitless. And the main thing we talk with as well with the human givens is we are not too sure what is it we could do. Would we be able to use our brain a little bit more? That's the thing, really, and a bit more evenly, right and left, or whatever, really. And I think pain is a hindrance in us being able to achieve a bit of a higher level of consciousness. That's one aspect of it, and the treasure is limitless in a way. And
this
we've got a societal problem when it comes to pain, and we've got a big opiate epidemic. And a lot of people are bypassing all the fighting with the dragon, and they get the treasure.
With the opiate that activates the reward system.
That's it, the reward system.
So this is when you I think you mentioned it in this podcast, but you've definitely spoken about it on like the intro to the course and maybe some other bits and pieces, or maybe other podcasts. You talk a lot about reframing our idea or our perception or the way we look at pain, and this is something that, from hanging out with you for the last year or so, absolutely took me a while to understand, but then blew my mind when I did, because it was like, oh, this is a mechanism within my body that isn't something that I should just dampen with opiates or codeine, basically in the UK codeine, and I should listen to it kind of thing, or feel it, and try and think about maybe why I've got it, and maybe reframe my idea of pain. Exactly. And then if you use the metaphor of the dragon and the pain being the dragon, and then if you're able to, like, for me it's a big dragon, because I still, even now, like the last week or so, have had some of my pains come back, and now I'm rethinking about why, and I think I've understood why a little bit more. And so it's like, it's quite a big dragon, and then as you say, like the treasure is limitless. Well,
the headspace you get back from not having too much tension into your shoulder and having that headspace taken away from you, I think is quite big, really. And it's let's not pathologize pain. That's the one big message about persistent pain. It's not a pathology. It's actually a blessing. And that's the weird part. It's the best thing that can have happened to you would be to have had pain in your shoulders when you go to work and when you sit on your ball at work, because it's telling you there is something that is not quite right. Okay? And what is it you need to shoulder? How much meaning do we bring back to the whole thing? Or is it just a dead end and it's just like completely bad, really? Okay? So, yes, posture is great, really, but of course, why is the muscle? What's the skin? Which area is it? Is that the thing, really? So what's part of the skin? Oh, yes, just in that area. Oh, okay. Oh, that's C7. That's my the root of my neck. And because I sit a little bit in that pattern, there's a bit of shearing in my neck. Okay. Oh, which is the muscle that could influence that? Oh, well, there's trapezius, there's your sternocleido, and there's my pecs as well. I would tend to roll my shoulder a bit forward because I'm this way, okay? So we know about that. And which organ can be involved as well, really, okay? What's going to be just there? Well, your lung, a little bit, really. And what's linked with your lung? By your diaphragm, and because you breathe. So all of a sudden, you've got a little bit of a framework to help you, even if it's not to give you meanings about dragons and metaphysical type stuff. Straight away, you know where the skin is, you know which spinal segment is involved, you know which muscle is actually affecting the whole thing, posturally, and you need which organ is actually involved. Bing. What do we do with that? Oh, we can do maybe a few breathing exercises. Oh, we can stretch your pecs. Oh, we can. And all of a sudden, you're starting to mitigate the mechanical stress you're under, the organ stress you're under. We talked about the vagal brake with the breathing and the 7-11 breathing technique, all those kind of stuff, which actually reopens a bit your blinkers about the whole lot. And then after, yes, what is it you're shouldering at the moment? Because if it's a pain in the shoulder, I don't know if it's your Achilles heel, and if you got Achilles tendinitis, maybe if you're a bit of a pain in the neck as well, or anyway, we don't like to be kneeling too much as well. We can be gutted, all the rest and things, really, okay? So what is happening at work that you might feel is actually leading you to things that you have to shoulder the whole lot, really. Maybe that's one way of looking at it. There's plenty of ways.
There's loads of stories.
Lots of stories.
And you like talking about the pain in the neck. I've got shoulder.
It's amazing in English. There's so many there's so many expressions because it relates to emotional state.
So it's almost
it's completely insane. People are in the UK.
We've always had these stories that we've always had these stories that have related a pain in a body part back to maybe the context of a story and you having that pain.
At last,
someone being in pain
is shouldering the world. Really, is having the world on his shoulder. Really, that's the thing. Really, it's that's the whole thing. Really, because the main problem with pain is that you think you're the only one who's in pain. When actually you're part of you're just one of the cog in a massive chain. You're gonna have 1,000 generations after you of your sons, and you've had your dads, and you're just there in the middle. It's just like it's the same same continuum. You have had so many people before you who've had to actually 40,000 years, we think, not much more, who had to actually think about the fact that the pain in their shoulder was going to hinder their ability to do things tomorrow. And what is it they were doing with their shoulder? What is it we do with our shoulders? What do you do with your knee? I walk. Okay, yeah, you walk. Yeah, no doubt you walk. Yeah. And then what does it do exactly, the knee? Well, it changes the shape of your leg. Isn't it? It makes you from a straight leg, and it's making it flexed. So it's a hinge. So it changes the shape. It changes the shape of your leg in order to make you go from A to B. So if it's not about change, if your knee is not about change, there's a bit of a glitch. So if you got a long-standing knee problem, maybe your relationship with change is a bit interesting. Or are you having to handle quite a lot of change at the moment? Oh yeah.
Or maybe you're avoiding lots of change.
Or you're avoiding, or you're not too sure how to go about it, or whatever. It's not a crystal ball, but it's your knee, not mine. But how is it I can help you to figure out what is it you do with it? And actually, we don't really remember what we do with our knees. That's the thing. What do you do with your hip? What do you do with your low back? What do you do? That's the whole stuff, really. So if your low back is not about support, I'm not too sure what it can be about, really. So is it financial support? Is it the support from your family? Is it the support from... Is it what you inherit from the past? Is it... That's all the whole lot. There's all the mix in the background, really. So there's so... And that's pretty interesting, because it helps you to fulfill your expectation about support. Yeah, I never have support. Oh, well, great, brilliant. Well, if you never have it, brilliant. Maybe realize that maybe you actually have a bit of support. And actually, or you actually support quite a lot of people. Yes, and maybe it's not very fair. Maybe it's about how fair it is. It's not about the support, really. All those bits and bobs. And I think it helps you direct your attention, because your expectation, if unfulfilled, is going to be seen by your brain as a threat, and over a long period of time is going to affect your cortisol level, and your adrenal gland is going to be a bit dampened in its activity. You're going to have an adrenal fatigue, and you'll have less cortisol. And if have got a sub-threshold of cortisol, what happens? You don't manage inflammation very well. And a humoral part of your immune system. Because there's DHEA as well, which is for your cellular mediated type immune system. Because there's all that as well. There's autoimmune problem, all those kind of stuff will come into play, because there's some inflammation into them. Oh no, strange. How come?
It's almost like people don't actually need to buy the course, and they can just listen to this podcast, and we just cover...
There's the whole stuff and more.
But it's...
But and all of a sudden it opens us up to a limitless thing. And some things that has been there forever. And there's no scientific proof. Okay, well, no, that's it. No, there is.
There's a lot.
There's a lot of scientific proof about the whole lot. And the thing is we don't use a Cartesian framework. We don't use double blind. It's great. You've proven, you've done so many good things, really. But from a medical perspective, you're a bit catextic.
It's the way because we take it to be the thing, the gospel, a double-blind test. Yeah. It works. Therefore, bing, that drug needs to go to market because it works.
That's it.
It's like,
but
that is good. That is good, but it's not. Yeah. We shouldn't.
It's a scientific process.
We shouldn't see it as the panacea. It's like
panacea. No.
I think my brother said.
It's just 51. It's 51% of the cases work compared to 49% of the cases who doesn't. So it's actually there's more likelihood of it working than there is not working by just one standard deviation, which is very little.
And although double-blind placebo test is excellent, and it's one of the best things that we've come up with
scientifically. Yeah.
My brother was saying to me, I think, it was, and he works for the NHS. He's a project manager making drugs, and he said ibuprofen, if it was to go through the testing and had the same results that it had that led it to market, now wouldn't go to market. Yeah. So it's like, but that surprised me. But then I thought about it, and I was like, well, that's actually not surprising because everything we do develops, and we always find issues with it.
That's it.
And I think, I think it's quite an interesting with with the central with the pain gate, and then there's Human Givens and the psychotherapy, almost like philosophical side of things. It adds, like, as you say, like an extra few strings to your bow, and you're not just looking at it from like mechanically my knee, I've had it operated on twice or once or whatever, maybe the surgeon messed it up. It's like the likelihood of a surgeon messing up something mechanical in your body is so unbelievably slim now, because they are obviously amazing at it. So it kind of gives you like, maybe there's somewhere else to look. Maybe there's this other pool of thought.
And you had a bit too much of an external locus of focus. You wanted somebody to deal with your problem and to solve it for you.
And that kind of brings me back to, I wanted to ask you a little bit more, for you to clarify a little bit more. Earlier you said, and this is something that's really tricky, still it's uncomfortable for me to like kind of, but you said that you as a therapist, you were starting out because you wanted to help people, and then you were like, but I actually no, I wanted to help other people for myself.
No, I wanted to help myself, basically,
right,
by helping people, in a way, really.
So,
but actually, I must not help people. I will not fix your problem, because it's not possible. You cannot delegate however you want me to fix the problem. I will not do it, because I cannot do it. There is no way in the world I can fix your problem.
So
because I'm going to fix just the mechanical part of it, but I'm not going to fix the way you use your knee, and I'm not going to fix the way you think about what your knee is doing, and I'm not going to fix about what the knee means to all of us in your head. That's the problem a bit. So that's what you need to do yourself. You have to figure that out yourself, and that's what the beauty of it. I care a lot about my patients, about giving them an insight of what a great opportunity pain is for them to fix their problem, because only them knows the solution to the problem, because they can explore the skin, the muscle, the joint, the organ. They can explore their arousal level, they can explore the meaning behind the part, they can explore which of the needs they thought they were not going to be able to fulfill if their part was actually not functioning properly. They can start to look at the whole lot quite in a bit of a broader fashion. And that's for them to do, because I can't do that for them. I can't do it for you. I'm trying to do it for myself already. So I think I found quite good stuff, and I'm at work I'm slaying dragons every day, quite a fair bit, and that's quite an interesting thing in a way. But I need others to, at times, because I can't see the bloody forest, the trees from the forest. That's the thing, really. I'm too embroiled, and I want it to be a quick fix. Oh yeah, it's just not that. No, it's not that. It's something else. But you need to be highlighted about it. So going to a human given therapist, for me, is quite an important thing. I go to acupuncture at times, and I like to go to massage. So I do quite a fair bit, and I like having others giving me a hand to actually help me manage different bits and bobs, really. So if I go to a masseuse and she works on the muscle chain about the whole thing, if I go to Christina Ticehurst in Trull, and she uses her MET and the whole thing, and opens the whole shoulders and work on my quads and machine and the whole lot, it works pretty interestingly. She helps me manage my peripheral modulation, and if I talk with my wife about the way we bring up the kids, all those kind of stuff, and we try to have a framework to be able to talk about it, so we don't headbutt each other, because we got different views about the whole lot, and we can put things, we can find lots of solutions to problems, really. We can think a bit more clearly. It's about clear thinking a little bit. So that's the whole thing about the course. We need to help people to think a bit more clearly and open up the whole realm of possibilities. And we are such a complicated organism. It's beyond belief. There's things we don't even know about anything. And the more we know about things, the least we know, which is completely insane. Okay? There's so much more. So we can't make, it's painful, let's take some painkillers and it's going to be better. Yeah, for horses, it works really well. For horses, I can tell you, it works bloody freaking well.
And you've said that it does work. Obviously, it works very well for humans, and sometimes it's necessary for humans for a very short period
of time. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, you lose all your family in a car accident. If you don't need a little bit of a lift for your mood, I can tell you it's going to be pretty tricky for you to manage a whole lot. And it's 21st century, it's pretty good to do the stuff. If you need surgery on your knee to have a good spinal block with some interesting anesthetics and things like that, you don't have to have a piece of leather between your teeth for the whole thing to be cut. Okay. It's 21st century. Let's not poo-poo scientific advances, but we can't have scientific advances who are actually looking at a smaller and smaller and smaller part of the whole lot. We need to be able to re-expand the whole self and look at the whole context a bit. We treat humans. We don't treat body parts. We don't treat tissue. We treat humans, and that's bonkers. That's the bonkers part, really. And if we bring meaning into the stuff, however it is, that's the thing, really. It's archetypal, really. The pet part of it, that's the whole thing as well. It's about pattern matching a little bit, really. We pattern match, really. And we, the Maoris, when they look at the sky, they don't see a bear. Because there's no freaking bears in New Zealand. Okay? There's no way there's a bear in the sky of the Maoris. Okay, but in Europe there's bears. Yeah, bears everywhere. Okay, we got bloody the big bear. Okay, in the sky it's a massive one. Everybody knows it. Okay, and that's the thing. We pattern match about our environment, about our world, and our brain is really catering for that. Really, it's a metaphorical representation of the whole thing. Really, it's not so much your knee, but it's what you can do with your knee, and it's what others have done with their knees before you, and what other people after you will do with their knees. That's the whole thing, really. If we still have knees in another 1,000 generations, really, which is likely, really, because we need it to go from A to B.
And to help us with change.
And deal with change. Yeah, that's it. Because that's something that's gonna not change.
Yeah, it's not gonna.
That's not gonna stop.
Yeah.
That's
change is not gonna change.
That's it. Especially with the new Prime Minister we're having, it's gonna be an interesting one.
Yeah.
We were so happy the previous one was there, and it was no change. We stayed. Let's not change anything.
Yeah,
that is so important. Let's not put people on their knees. Others are going to be quite happy to throw everybody on their knees.
Yeah, I think Boris Johnson's going to do a pretty good job.
Yeah, good. I think he's
maybe.
Yeah. At least he's going to move.
Yeah.
Because what do we do with our knees? We go from A to B. Huh? That's it. Huh?
Yeah.
If you keep your knee tool straight,
even if we don't want to go to B, it's probably better than being at A.
Yeah. Whilst wanting to be at B, it's even worse. Anyway.
Yeah. So we've done the first part of the course, which is it's not going to be very much money, like a few pounds, right?
Yeah.
And then
£5, £4.99.
Yeah, and it's just
excluding VAT.
It's like it's just setting the base there, understanding pain.
Yeah.
Right, and then the second part of the course is going to tackle
body parts.
Yeah,
and how to apply the whole thing to the body part, and it's going to sound pretty straightforward to people. People will all like stories, because that's why they made side stories. That's what we do to our kids usually. We tell them stories, and we like to tell each other stories. That's why people like to watch Emmerdale, but don't tell anybody. Or EastEnders.
Or anything.
Or Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Because in Emmerdale, the dragons are not really... they're always the same a bit, really. But
in
Emmerdale, yeah. But in Game of Thrones, there's definitely dragons, so that we can really do the whole lot. It's all about stories. It's all stories. We like to be entertained. Our bodies are entertaining us, and it's been for a while, really.
And us being in pain is in fact, in a way, a story that we really believe about us being in pain. It's like we feel, obviously the pain it's not made up or whatever.
There's nothing
But it's-
more real than pain.
Of course, but
That's it.
you know, you're talking about us maybe like having an issue with knee, and maybe we're not so comfortable with change, or maybe it's something else or whatever. So it's like we've believed a story that we've built over years that we're not comfortable with change, or that we're not getting the right support, and we believe that we shouldn't do anything or act upon that story.
And it's you're imbibed in the whole story. Whether you know the story or not,
Exactly.
your brain knows the story,
Yeah.
and your circuitry and your wiring and your pattern matching and your ability to make metaphorical representation of things is what it's on about. You are actually a story, and you share the story with the 7 billion people on Earth.
And that's where the expectation fulfillment theory kind of comes in.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. It's all about dream and slow wave sleep. It's completely like, it's about physiological process. It's linking the mind and the body. It's just like E equal MC square in your brain, in a way of looking at people and their way of approaching the world and dealing with change. That's the thing a bit, and dealing with uncertainty, and dealing with the future already, dealing with time. Yeah, no. It's absolutely, the ramification of it can't be under maybe even spoke about, because there's so much more possible that we can even know about what that can be bringing, because of a few people could actually, after a while, maybe a few generations down the line of using that way of doing, all of a sudden will reach a point where some people might have access to part of their brain that we never even dreamt about being able to access, or framework, or patterns,
or in a way they're being able to access parts of their brain in a way that we didn't even.
Exactly, which is locked in, but we are such a low level of functioning that we can't really have access to that next part, because we need to really solve that really. And that's the fact that there's more locked into our genetic pool and the way the whole stuff is expressed with our physiological processes and mental processes and our consciousness of being conscious. Like you can't even, I don't know, it's really exciting. It's really like to be able to have had the opportunity to put that in place and in practice, and you cannot but look forward to waking up tomorrow morning and having more adventures, really, because it's really awesome, really.
Another day of slaying dragons.
Another day of slaying dragons, really, and maybe bigger ones as well, because you need to train with little ones, and then you're sure you're not going to lose too many feathers,
and then you're going to learn how to tackle them, learn how to find them.
That's it.
Blah blah blah, and then
then all your friends with the Extinction Rebellion, who are really well intentioned and who really want but who are not very positive. They are a little bit negative. They are not very optimistic. That's a bit the problem. They would really do with slaying dragons themselves a little bit, and not waiting for others to do it. So
not shouting at others, not asking or demanding other people,
begging others. It's not really good look, in my opinion.
It's tricky, because obviously from their perspective, change isn't happening
fast enough,
or it's not happening fast enough, or it's not happening in the right direction. That's my issue with it personally, in that I haven't read anything from anyone that's definitive about what direction we should take and how we should tackle the climate crisis. It's not that I don't believe that there's a climate crisis, because I think that's pretty undeniable. But it's like, how
but it's not really, let's not make it a climate crisis, let's make it a meaning crisis.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's a tricky thing, because
the framework we have. Why is it you? That's the thing. Like you want to do communist way, it's fucked up. You want to do Nazi way, that's definitely
not the
if
one.
we agree it's fucked up. Okay, and we do the liberal way, and we know there's quite a lot of flaws, but it works pretty well. That's the thing, really. And unless we find a different humanistic way of doing, we coined a different way, and it's quite applicable, and it's an evolution to what we are doing already now. Yeah, why not really? But the problem is we fall back to a communist way, or Marxist way, we fall back into liberal way, and we fall back into a Nazi way, okay? Or evolutionary humanistic way, okay? So that's the problem really. We need to evolve, but we can't. So we have the liberal mechanism. Great, but what is it we do with it at the moment? And that's maybe what the problem is really. That's maybe
what is it that we do there at the moment?
Well, we do fuck all. That is meaningful. Well, we not fuck all. We do very little that is meaningful for all of us. That's it. And what we think is meaningful for a few is actually not meaningful for the rest. That's the main problem.
And this again, for me, kind of bringing it back a little bit to the pain and the card texture,
and it brings a lot of pain. It brings a lot of pain,
and the context blindness.
That's it.
I think a lot of people are in pain.
Yeah,
a lot of people have bad sleep.
Yeah,
and a lot of people that I talk to, it's anecdotal, of course, have bad sleep because they dream loads.
Yeah,
and including myself.
Yeah,
and I think that's unbelievably interesting. And with the card texture, context blindness, it's like there's a lot of things that I used to do and that I still do, but I'm working on it, that I think is really meaningful, really, really meaningful. Going to have a pint with friends. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But if you're doing that instead of slaying some dragons that need to be slayed before the next week starts,
that's it.
So maybe you need to figure out how to get rid of some of those dragons before you enjoy that pint with your friends.
That's it.
And it's like, and also what meaning does that have? Oh, conversation with your friends, and that's always good, and building relationships. Yeah.
And
maybe
you bounce ideas because maybe they've been slaying the same dragons than you.
Yeah, but also maybe doing that 2 to 3 times a week or whatever. Maybe that reduces its meaning, or you're having the same conversations, you're not really going anywhere with it. And it's quite an interesting thing because obviously you rationalize it because you want to go and have that pint, you want to get that spike of serotonin and blah blah blah. But realistically, this is how I think of delayed gratification. It's like if you think of that as the gratification and you delay it for a little bit longer and you do slay some dragons and then go have that, A, you get a better feeling, B, you've got some dragons to talk about that you slayed, and C, it's like actually going for a pint and hanging out with friends or playing some pool or whatever is actually quite self-absorbed, self-involved. Whereas if you want to have some meaning, it's like, what's it you said about intentionally moving in
dopamine,
the world?
It's like intentional.
If you want to have that, it's like work towards something that you find meaningful. That could be doing your grade 6 on an instrument. That could be working towards helping your mum pay for her bathroom refit or something.
That's
anything, but all of those things have more meaning than beating a few people at pool down the pub every Thursday, Friday and Saturday night. So it's quite an interesting thing that's actually quite difficult, and the reason why I think this links in with pain, A, because people who don't have meaning generally in pain, is
prioritizing,
because it's like and humility, and it's like looking at yourself, and there's loads of big words of like gratitude and empathy and stuff going around in the like self-help and space, but it's like with pain and you saying stuff like that you have rehearsed and you've become good at being in pain. It's like, what? Okay, stop. No, I'm not gonna listen anymore. And it's like, that's fine. But if you're completely realistic with yourself,
honest with yourself,
and that might mean that you need to go on a cycle ride. My brother, his form of meditation is washing his van, or breathing, or meditating, or yoga. You might need to do those things to de-arouse yourself. But if you can really think about the patterns and the things that you're doing within life, there's definitely, because no one's perfect, there are definitely some things that you could cut out to sacrifice a little bit in the aim of maybe spending a bit more time with your son, or maybe I'm not saying spending time with your son is a dragon, but it's like if it's something that you don't necessarily
not doing it now. The dragon is not going to be able to be slayed if tomorrow you say, "Oh, I wish I had spent some time with him yesterday," because it's finished. You can't do it really. Oh, I wish I had spent some time with.
So don't let that dragon get any bigger and spend some time with your son, or you know, and I think that's
'Cause he needs a
one of the
dad
biggest
and all those
things,
things, really.
like the humility of trying to look at yourself, and it's like it's never ending for me. As I say, like we've spent a fair amount of time with each other for over a year, maybe 18 months now, trying to do different videos and trying things out and figuring out a way of working, and then podcast, blah blah blah, and it's like, and you've spoken about all this stuff ever since, and obviously I've been learning about it, and I find this fascinating. And for me, I can never be humble enough. I can never. It's like, obviously I've got a long way to go, and I've only been actively putting it into my life for maybe 6 months to a year. But I could, every moment that I'm like, I'm going to see my friends a little bit less at these social gatherings that are going to be really great and really fun, but maybe there's some other things that are more meaningful to me to do.
And you have to be careful not to set too many high expectation on the whole meeting with your friends, because that's just yours, because they've got an agenda as well, and it might be different to yours,
Sure.
in a way, and therefore you have to be quite clear about the expectation you have about the whole
that's
lot.
a true humility. That's a true humility, which is
Maybe.
not just, well, I think it is. It's not, for me, the humility isn't just being like, you know, really nice to everyone or whatever. It's like being real with what your expectations are and how other things in your life fit in with those expectations. So being like, maybe humility is not the right word, but being as honesty. And it's like, I want to do X, Y, and Z, and those things are time consuming because I need to learn them, and they're time consuming anyway. And going down the pub 3 nights a week is not going to help me get any of those things done any quicker.
Little by little, the bird makes his nest. For sure.
Yeah.
The bird
And
doesn't make his nest really fast.
with that honesty, it's like you can never stop being more honest with yourself, like little by little, making some honest changes, and then maybe there's another honest change that you can make next week, and then a little bit more. And with pain, I think that kind of confronts it, or it gives you
an incentive to actually do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that's for sure. Or you can bury your head in the sand and do the ostrich, and then great. There's all the opportunities. With the whole way, there's no way to impose it on anybody. It's just I suggest, and I think a lot of people who use the Pen Gate and who do great work about the whole stuff as well, who use that model, are able to do. It's just the model. That's it. Try to do it really. And if I talk to you about intimacy and privacy, well, I have to contend with it as well. You have to contend with it, and you know, you've got a girlfriend. Well, you've got very little privacy. You got some intimacy, and all of a sudden, she ditches you. You've got no intimacy, and you got shitloads of privacy. So all of a sudden, it changes all the time. But we can talk about you having been dumped by your girlfriend, and then that's pretty arousing, and then we're not going to be able to talk too much longer about the whole lot.
about anything else.
Because it's too much of a sensitive subject. But talking about intimacy and privacy, you chuckle about the whole thing, because it's it's like it's a context. It's a context, really. So you can't take the horse. You can't take the horse to water. You can't make it drink. The horse needs to be willingly doing the whole lot, because he needs it, and he realizes he needs it. That's all, really. And if you can be sold a framework like that, however you use it, even if you just do the peripheral modulation, it's fab, really. But having a bit the whole central modulation and understanding the meaning you can have in the whole lot, it adds so much more depth to the whole thing. Really, you do, really. And I'm not too sure whether we need to be humble about it, but I think we need to be motivated to do it. And I think the dopamine part of it plays quite an important role to it, really. And it's not an easy task. We go a bit against the grain. It's not instant messaging. You have to ride the whole load, get on your horse, do 12 hours, change horse because he's just died, walk a bit more, kill a few people, get on another horse, do the whole load, and deliver the message. And then you need to get the response and then do the whole thing back. It's a really tedious way, and it takes time. But what else do we have to do? Anyway.
And we have enough time.
what else do we have to do? I don't know. That's where the meaning of the whole thing is a bit. Liberalism is great, really, but to do what, really? What's the meaning behind it, really? That's it, really. So climate change is a meaning crisis, an existential crisis, an individual existential crisis in a very liberal, humanistically driven world, basically. And that's the whole thing, really. And if we don't go back to having some meaning in a whole lot, we go in a wall, for sure. And once we're in a wall, we'll bounce of it. And we'll have to do something about it anyway. We're very good at that. Yeah, no problem. There's plenty of ways, really. We can start to kill each other. That's going to be adding lots of meaning. We've done that very well.
Yeah,
forever.
We're very good at that.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And
we've
that's
done
solved,
that.
no problem.
We've always done that, and we're still doing that.
That's it.
And it gives some people some meaning in a
Yeah.
fucked up, twisted way.
That's it. Good luck. They might not be buying the course for $4.99.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not necessarily the money, but it's a waste of time.
Or maybe they'll buy it for 99p, but they won't read it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think we actually, maybe for those people, we should make it at £99, actually. So it will add value to it. They might think it's actually a good thing to do.
Oh, what? Because it's more
expensive.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So first part of the course going to be cheap. It's going to be like £4, £5, and whatever. And it's going to outline. It's going to outline the how to understand pain.
Yeah.
So these are the mechanisms
the
within
framework.
a human.
Yeah.
Mind and body.
Yeah.
Human.
Yeah.
That are the reasons why we experience pain, and it's specifically talking about persistent pain.
Yeah. Because pain that resolve itself is people are not going to buy the course because they're not in pain. People are going to buy the course because they're still in pain. They haven't found a solution to the problem, really.
Sure. But, I mean, if people do want to buy it to understand pain, because everyone knows someone in pain for sure, then obviously there's that. And we're going to work from now, like through August, and then in September, we're going to start filming the second part of the course, which will work on individual body parts.
Yeah. Cool. And then we might try to release that in 2020.
Yeah, 2020. And then that's the other thing I wanted to sort of kind of bring up, I guess, is the idea of this first part of the course is obviously it's so far as we see it at this point, it's all there. Yeah. And it's like a really good foundation of understanding pain. But we also have spoken about redoing it and developing it.
It will evolve.
Hopefully after
having talked about it and having had comment from people, hopefully people might be wanting to engage with the whole lot and have things to say about how excellent it is or how horrible that is, and how can we say those kind of things, and hopefully we'll be able to engage with those people as well, because it's very interesting to know why people are so upset about the whole lot, really, and because we're quite happy to take responsibility for the whole thing, really. It's going to be a bit difficult to argue about the whole thing, really, of it, but because it's pain and it's for everybody the same, really.
But there's definitely going to be things that we
can do better. We can make better.
Sure.
We can word it better. We can be a bit more inclusive and more PC about the whole lot, for sure. Whether we want to or not is a different story.
Well, yeah, and I think the idea of people being able to comment and leave feedback and stuff, and then I don't know, maybe we do a podcast on it every month or something. And we answer some of those questions.
That's good.
It's like regardless of whether they don't like us being PC or not, they hopefully they have more substance behind their comment, and then we can address it. And that actually for me is like that's quite an exciting idea, because it's I think that's if someone's
it's less catectic. Because if it's the two of us doing the whole lot, we're a little bit in a resonance bubble, a little bit. Echo chamber. Resonance bubble. In the echo chamber, exactly. So we need to expand the whole lot a bit and have other people commenting on it. But I guess it's a universal subject, so it should really attract people and people who are going to want to say things about it, really. And because, well, we know how it's being dealt with anyway. So we could have doctors coming here and talk with us if they want about their model of pain and how they go about doing it, and how the NHS and the system does it, because we know it's pretty clear. There's lots of research about it, and there's lots of facts and lots of things.
And actually,
really. And how is it working for them? Really, that's it. Really, how many less people there is in pain every year? And actually, there's much more pain here, much more pain every year, and there's much more addiction to opiates every year, and there's much more suicide every year, and there's much more of it all, and people on mood stabilizing medication, and maybe more people taking drugs.
It's like
recreational.
We're living longer. We're living longer.
Great.
And everyone's like, yeah, you never live longer, blah, blah, blah. But I can't remember who was saying this earlier, but it's like, it doesn't look like we're having a better quality of life for that time.
That's it.
It's like, do you really want to live longer, but miserable for like a lot of it?
That's it.
It's quite interesting, as you say, like addiction's gone up, recreational drug use, blah, 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 blah. There's loads of like suicide and attempted suicide. It's very interesting statistics. So it's although medicine has done loads of incredible things, like all sorts of amazing stuff, maybe there are some limitations. So let's maybe
we can wrap it up and then talk another stage about the second part of it and what we've got in store for people
in a month or two
about it, really.
Let's organise our ideas on that, and then
that's it
come back together in a couple of months.
That's it. Cool, good job.
Thank you, Alexei.
Thank you, Elliot.